During a group Zoom session, an interesting direct experience arose in one of my guests, leading to the following discussion in this video about their experience that time briefly stopped and of what's often called witness consciousness, and how these experiences will make a profound difference in their spiritual practice and in daily life. This came after the group had spent some time in silence and after I had mentioned the concept of awakening upside down, which is a way of describing the kind of experience people often share with me when we're together. I call it awakening upside down because instead of starting at the beginning and going step by step towards some imagined future at the end, it's like we go to the very end first. We see what we can see from there and know what we can know from there, then bring that direct experience back into our lives right here and now so that we can know what steps will take us back towards home. Please enjoy and let me know what you think in the comments.
We did about 20 minutes of silence there, actually. But I'd like to offer that opportunity for anyone if they'd like to share a little bit of their experience first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my experience was definitely, it was very quiet. My focus was initially just on my breathing. Then I became aware of my heartbeat. But from a oneness perspective, that sort of dropping the self, I was sort of found myself being an observer.
Yeah.
That's what I would share.
Brilliant. And when you say observer, did you mean to some extent that you were aware of that witness consciousness, as it's often called, that was observing, like you said, observing this tunnel, observing colors, observing the thoughts, and so on and so forth. Sure.
Yeah.
That's great. There could be a great deal of, as I'm sure you're somewhat aware yourself, there can be a great deal of freedom in that witnessing experience. Because it means, obviously, if we're dialed into that witness, then we can see that there's a difference between the observer and what's actually happening in the field of awareness. If we can let play what's out there in the field of perception and recognize that we're a witness, then it also becomes possible to see that what's happening out there isn't actually affecting the witness. Does that make sense to you, Carol?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll also just say, as you're speaking, it's bringing water to my eyes and just a feeling of like there was a moment there where I was very deeply, like when you were talking about the witness observer thing, I just was like, something just snapped and I was like, whoa, that was weird. Just an instant of
what do you think snapped?
It's like time stops.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes, when the experience of time stops, that's so often tied really quite tightly to the experience of that witness consciousness. Since generally our perceptions sort of have to at least seem like they take place in a time frame. That's kind of normally how things seem to be. And so if that's been shaken a little bit, then it's one of those experiences that shows how capable we are of stepping a little bit outside the bounds of time. And that's sort of a very reasonable, rational, ordinary, actually, sort of progression in that witness consciousness. And it's sort of like if our perceptions generally seem like they have to take place in the framework of time and space, and we get that shaken for a little bit, one of the things that you may have noticed in that moment is that the witness, even though it was impossible to locate in time or space, was still aware that happened. Which is a long-winded way of saying that it's possible for us to have a kind of awareness that does transcend the boundaries of time and space. which does, I don't know, maybe that sounds like a heavy duty, existential philosophical thing to say. But to me, it's really just a charming opportunity to experience a little bit of the truth of that directly in a way that's actually very simple. It's not complicated particularly. And it points to a kind of freedom that also goes beyond the boundaries of even time and space. And that couldn't be, what a charming, beautiful thing to get to touch with someone. And again, even if it was slightly disorienting, I mean, if you went back to being a year and a half years old or a year old or something, and you took your first couple of wobbly steps, across the carpet and didn't bonk your head on the corner of the coffee table or something, you could have said that going from crawling to stumbling was slightly disorienting. But I mean, it was a real radical change of perspective on things for a moment there. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't a terribly reasonable, wonderful, marvelous change in your limitations. And in that sense, even if you fell down and bonked your head and the whole thing was slightly disorienting, it doesn't change the fact that it could be seen as a compelling step in in the journey. I opened this conversation a little bit by saying, well, if we go to the end and we see what we see from there, and we know what we can know from there, and then we look back, to me, your experience also offers just precisely that kind of opportunity. Like if you were to, just as a thought experiment, and see what's it like to meet that challenge, whatever it may be, from the standpoint, from that place of that witness, and see if it feels a little different to meet whatever that challenge is from that witness that you yourself described as being quite still. I can only imagine that that would also mean that there's a certain amount of peacefulness in that witness awareness.
And also, when you're saying those words, it feels like there's no judgment of it. It's just
very much so, isn't it?
Yeah, it just
very much so. The witness doesn't need to judge, does it? It's like, okay, you're there, I'm here, I see you. I see really fully. I see you. Isn't that so?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you were to take any challenge you have in your life, if you were to meet it from that quiet, peaceful place, lacking that judgment, is there not a certain sort of clarity that often kind of is afforded in that? There's a certain amount of just raw peacefulness, first of all, that is sort of like provides enough space to take a deep breath, to not have to react in an unmeasured way. So if you just to meet whatever the challenge is from that witness, probably changes the way you meet that challenge a great deal.
Kind of changes everything, honestly.
Well, I would say, I mean, that's a completely reasonable thing to say, isn't it? and
it's just it's the it's kind of funny to think about. Yeah, I just catch myself just in my thoughts with so much judgment, and I'm aware that I'm judging right away. I'm aware, and then I tell myself, "Oh, I'm judging. I'm not. Let's see if I can go to a more non-judgmental place with that." And I'm correcting myself.
Yes, I do. I do completely. And I think
kind of funny.
that's where the word practice begins to actually mean something. And that's what makes a part of our mind literally wake up and go, oh, wait a minute, I've seen something new here. It's like the lights literally went on. That's why they call it enlightenment. I've just seen something really clearly and new, like fully drenched in this light of awareness. And because I've seen something new, it is like the ship at the lighthouse. That's why it's a metaphor I've always loved. It's when the ship comes into the harbor and sees the light from the lighthouse, what's meaningful is that the captain of the ship has seen some new information. The ship still doesn't change course unless the captain actually chooses to change course. But they now have a whole body of new information that they didn't have before, that they can make a new choice with. And that's a powerful moment. The lighthouse doesn't reach into the ship and turn the steering wheel at all, which is sometimes a funny way we, you know, we misthink about it sometimes. Like it's still up to the captain to adjust to this new information or adjust to this new experience, and to and that's the act of being, you know, in spiritual terms, that's the act of being mindful. Like, am I going to use what I know that I know and what I've seen that I've seen? Can I be mindful about remembering to use it? And the more we use it, the more it does become more natural. That's where practice matters. It's also like you so vividly described, Carol, like that a huge difference between your experience now and on a sort of more ordinary regular basis is that judging mind has been very, very automatic. And in a sense, what you just described was that it's that faculty of constant judgment that sends us down our old patterns, down our old pathways incessantly, without the opportunity to see something new and different and frankly more peaceful. And so just the mere act of beginning to jump in the middle in that, you know, mindfully in that moment, and disengage that faculty of judgment a little bit, even if it's just a little. Like let's say you're not Buddha and you're not perfect, and it's not, you know, perfect from here on out. Would you settle tomorrow for doing it better 5 or 10%? Like, would that make a meaningful difference in your world? Sure it would.
It'd
Like
probably be 1 or 2%.
1 or 2%, you
You
know,
know,
fantastic.
you gotta start somewhere.
You have to start. Yeah, absolutely, that's true. And you know, as much as you know, things like spiritual experiences and awakenings and enlightenings and things like that, they're often, you know, couched in terms of being like bombshell moments where someone's, you know, had some explosive or outrageous or wild experience that blew their mind. That happens, sure. But most of the time, the spiritual rubber meets the road in very, very ordinary moments, like you have every day, you know. And it's being mindful in those moments that really is the practice, because it's that kind of repetition that slowly begins to really break down the deep canyons in our mind, that where those patterns are so sticky and so deeply held. And it can take time, and it can take genuine, well, mindfulness is probably the best word of all. I mean, we could call it work, or we could call it effort. Sometimes it probably seems that way. But mindful is probably still one of the best words for it, because that's really what it is. It's being mindful about staying in touch with what we know that we know, and what that we've seen that we've seen. And
Yeah,
doing it over and
beautiful.
over and over to, you know, go through whatever process we need to begin to break down those old ways within us very gently. And you know, even though I just described what sounds like work, which sounds suspiciously like a lot of effort, and there is a way in which that's meaningful. And yet, Carol, I would entreat you to return to the experience we had a few moments ago, in which you were quiet, and then ask that, was there any point in which that observer itself was sweating or trying hard or really efforting? You see what I mean? Right?
No, there was not.
No, no, there absolutely wasn't. So it may sound like a little bit of a contradiction to say something like, well, the spiritual rubber really meets the road with some effort and focus and mindfulness and da da da. And there's a way in which there's some truth in that. And that's our part, you know, to try to bring what we can in that way. And yet, at the core of that experience itself, there was absolutely nothing but pure grace. There was no effort in that for you at all. And would that not be absolutely the essence of the most loving divinity?
Mm.
That it's not that you're asked to hurt or sacrifice. You are just given what you're given because of the grace of what you are. And there you are. And so you have it. Full stop. End of story. Could there be anything more loving than that? I can hardly imagine what it would be. And so, goodness. It's sort of like having to try hard to remember that the truth is so graceful, so grace-filled, that in the end, we don't have to even, there is no trying for it. It's what we already are. It's already here. It is already given. It is already ours. Amen.
If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, check the website in the description box for the next free Zoom gathering. There's other events, one-on-ones, or other ways to connect and grow along your journey. Peace be with you.